What's up, everybody? Welcome to Court Vision. In today's video, I'm going to be going through the strengths and weaknesses of some of these Eastern Conference play-in teams, that being Miami, Chicago, Orlando, and Atlanta. I'm going to tell you how I think they're going to match up, and I'm going to give you my predictions for who I think is going to come out of the play-in. Starting off with the 10 seed Miami Heat, there's not a lot positive to say about this team post Jimmy Butler trade. They really do lack a lot of firepower, and there's a lot of deficiencies in the personnel. But to start off with some of their strengths, obviously most of them are going to be on the defensive end. And the first thing you got to talk about is the great size and personnel that they have defensively. In your starting lineup, you've potentially got, 4 or 5 guys, 6'6" and above, right? Your smallest player in your starting lineup is potentially Tyler Hero, and he's 6'5". So that gives you great size. You've got Nikola Jovic to go to, Jaime Jaquez. And then if you're starting the double big lineup with Bam and Kel'el Ware, I mean, it's a huge team with a lot of versatility defensively. And of course, Andrew Wiggins is a great defender as well with some switchability and size. Of course, another thing you have to consider with this team is the scheme and the coaching. Erik Spoelstra is a defensive genius. He's been doing it for years. I think it's pretty well agreed upon at this point. He's probably the best defensive coach in the NBA. And the Heat have a top 10 defensive rating this season, which, considering the personnel on the team and how in flux kind of the roster has been, especially post Jimmy Butler trade, having a 113.2 defensive rating, being ninth in the NBA, that's not bad. The defensive personnel and size they have give a lot of versatility. You can run the double big lineup with Bam and Ware if you want. You can go bigger, you can go smaller. Spo obviously loves to get to his zone defenses, stuff like that. So there's definitely some versatility this team can get to with the lineups. Now, of course, the Miami Heat are the 10 seeds, so there's definitely some weaknesses we've got to cover as well. And the number one thing that I was seeing watching some of these games, preparing, researching for these videos, is the crazy over-reliance that this team has on perimeter screen actions to generate their offense. And so what I mean by that is they're running a lot of pick and roll with Tyler Hero and Bam or Tyler Hero and Kel'el Ware. They're running all kinds of DHO actions where you'll get either Tyler Hero or Davion Mitchell running up out of the corner over a screen, getting the handoff, trying to get downhill. Things like that is where the overwhelming majority of their offense comes from. And, teams with the personnel to deal with that, teams with switchable lineups, good screen navigators, good, drop bigs, stuff like that, are going to have an easy time defending it because it's such a simple and uniform kind of offense. And of course, that obviously stems just from the lack of talent on the team offensively. Not to say these guys are bad, they're NBA players, obviously, but in terms of NBA quality offensive creators, it's kind of just Tyler Hero and to some extent Bam Adebayo. There's no secondary creation. I guess you can count Andrew Wiggins in there. They have good play finishers, like guys like Duncan Robinson or Haywood Highsmith are great shooters. And you've got obviously the lob threat with like guys like Bam and Kel'el Ware, but there's very little threatening when it comes to, pure offensive creation from this team. Something else that concerns me a lot about this team is their inability to really score at the rim in any, meaningful way. They're 25th in rim frequency this year in terms of percentage of their shots at the rim, and 22nd in accuracy. And like the percentage they shoot at the rim, that's according to Cleaning Glass. And they settle for a lot of like floater range, short mid-range shots. A big criticism that's been leveled against Bam this season is that he's taking way too many of these like short mid-range face-up jumpers and stuff like that. Tyler Hero really loves getting to his floater off of the pick and roll and off of drives. A whole quarter, 25.8% of their shots come in what's considered the short mid-range. So, those short jumpers or floater range, but they only shoot 45.8% on those shots, which is barely above league average. So when you're taking so many of your shots in this zone and you're not, outstandingly efficient on them, it's not good for your offense. And something else it's a smaller concern than any of these other things, but definitely a concern to think about is teams are not respecting Bam when he's at the 4 as a spacing threat. And that really kind of limits how effective the double big lineup can be. There's definitely still some looks it can get to with Bam screening for Hero with Ware in the dunker spot, stuff like that. But there's definitely some limits to the double big lineup. And then a couple of questions I have for this team that will kind of determine their floor and ceiling going through the play-in is can they get anyone to step up offensively as a creator besides Tyler Hero? Can we get Bam back to a higher level as a scorer and finisher, specifically at the rim? And then can we get more creation out of Andrew Wiggins? I know he's had some great games since coming to Miami, but it hasn't been super consistent. So I would like to see a little more out of him as well. And then the second question I have is in the double big lineup, can Bam and Ware make their threes enough to get teams to start respecting them? Because that lineup obviously has a ton of utility defensively, but offensively, there are definitely limitations that might prevent them from being able to play it as much as they want. All right, moving on now to the 9 seed Chicago Bulls. This is a team that I'm actually a lot more positive on, I think, than many other people that I see talking about basketball are. And really, the main strengths that I see that are the reasons I'm positive on this team is just how competent and like balanced and modern their offense looks, right? I mean, they have a high 3 point volume, which is they shoot second most in the league after the Celtics. It's a little higher than maybe I would like, but it's definitely a good sign. And then, they run the offense very well. They move the ball on the perimeter. They have a reasonable driving kick game. They have post scoring available to them with Vucevic, and they have that 5-out offense, which is so key in the modern NBA. Josh Giddey has really surprised me positively. I know a lot of people are very negative on him, but just watching Chicago Bulls game as a primary playmaker and driver, he's effective enough to give them a floor. And his downhill threat as a driver and finisher is surprisingly good. He shoots reasonably well at the rim. To me, watching him, he passes the eye test, and I get a lot of the criticism that he gets. But for me, I think as a playmaker for this team, you could definitely do worse. They also do a pretty good job hiding their defensive weaknesses. Mainly Vucevic as a rim protector. Obviously, he's an offensive minded kind of big man, not a super great rim protector, but they do a good job of walling up and helping off of drives to prevent those kind of paint touches. So teams don't actually shoot a huge volume at the rim against this team. Obviously, they do shoot fairly well at the rim against the team. They don't get to the rim as much because of the defensive scheme that's designed to kind of hide Vucevic, and they do a fairly good job at that for the team that they are. They also do a very good job defending the three. Statistically, they actually have the best opponent 3-point percentage in the league, 34.7, which is kind of crazy. It's a hard thing usually to quantify, but over the course of an entire season, holding opponents to 34.7% from three, clearly something is going right there. And this team is also very just capable of kind of having these explosive offensive games that we've seen. That one game versus the Celtics, that one game versus the Lakers. There was another game in there versus the Knicks where they're just dropping 140 plus points and just having these explosive, crazy games and beating teams that they probably shouldn't. And then obviously that's helped by the 5-out offense that they have, as I mentioned before. Team also clearly does have some, glaring weaknesses as well that have to be talked about. In terms of defensive personnel, they're very lacking. Vooch at the center of it all is not a very good rim protector, and then they also don't have spectacular point of attack defenders on the perimeter, especially with Lonzo being out. He's most likely going to miss at least the first play-in game, according to head coach Billy Donovan. So that's not great for them because Lonzo is pretty important for them generating steals and just being a positive defender. And then in terms of wing defenders, it's Modest Buzelis is your best wing defender. No disrespect to him, but he doesn't really have the bulk on his frame, and he's also a rookie, so there's a lot of just things to watch there with him. So a guy like him as your best wing defender is not necessarily a recipe for success. especially considering how small this team is in general. They routinely play three guard lineups, and they just don't really have super talented wings on either end of the floor. I mean, really, their best starting wing is Modest Buzelis. Again, no disrespect to him, but that kind of, you know, lack of wing talent is definitely going to be a concern for them going forward if they, make it out of the play-in. Also, outside of Josh Giddey, there's no real high volume playmakers on this team, and the self creation is also kind of lacking as well. Kobe White's a solid scorer, and he's very capable of having good games, even if he's a little inconsistent. And then Vooch obviously is very capable as like a post up threat and a shooter, but they don't really have great self creation or playmaking in general. So a couple of questions for this team. Number one thing is just, does the offense show up? They have the capability to be explosive that's been demonstrated in these games, but they also have the capability to really stink it up. They've had some pretty gross offensive games and stretches this season. They've been more consistent after the trade deadline, after they traded Zach LaVine and everything like that. There's definitely still some questions on the consistency and how real the offense is. And then the other thing is Josh Giddey. His 3-point shooting is a big question. He's been taking more shots and making them at a much better clip over the past couple months, but teams haven't been and probably will continue to disrespect him as a shooter. So he's going to have to make his threes, force people to respect him. And then obviously his playmaking is a concern for a lot of people. I think it's pretty solid, but there's definitely some concerns about how well it'll hold up against better defenses, defenses that don't allow him as much dribble penetration, because a lot of his playmaking is reliant on him, either getting past his man or splitting two defenders and then getting the pass off from there. All right, moving on from the Bulls, next team that we're going to talk about here is the Atlanta Hawks. And this is a team that's a little frustrating to talk about for me because they so clearly have pieces and concepts and some things that they do as a team offensively and defensively that I really like. But then again, they're also just not a very good team. And part of that is obviously because they're missing their second best player in Jalen Johnson right now. There's definitely some questions about the roster, Trae Young's future, stuff like that. But in terms of them for this year at the play-in, there are definitely some weaknesses, but there are also some strengths that this team has. And the number one thing in the strengths column is Trae Young. Trae Young is probably the best offensive player in the East play-in, and his just ability to create for himself, play make for other people, his 3-point shooting, everything about Trae Young, you know who he is, really just lifts the Hawks offense hugely. And he's not been as bad defensively. He might have been, in some past seasons. The next strength, another player, which I know it's a little bit of a cop-out to say players are strengths, but I mean, Dyson Daniels is definitely a strength, right? As a defender, everyone knows what he's capable of, putting up ridiculous steal numbers, things like that. He's a great on-ball defender. He's also super impactful off-ball. Can't say enough positively about him as a defender, but then also on the offensive end, him as a secondary creator, driving, getting to his floater, which is pretty consistent, or driving and kicking it out, getting the ball movement started. He's actually been surprisingly effective. And that was a big concern I had about Atlanta that I'll talk about when I get to the weaknesses, is their lack of secondary creation. But Dyson Daniels has done a good amount to mitigate that with how effective he's been offensively. And then his shooting has obviously been better as well. And the third strength that I'll talk about for this team is, their 5-out spacing. I'm very positive on Onyeka Okongwu as a spacing threat. He shoots pretty well. His percentages aren't crazy, but they're good. And just me looking at it, it passes the eye test. He has a clean-looking jumper, which I know isn't the most scientific analysis, but it definitely does warrant consideration. And then this team also definitely has some weaknesses. Number one thing that sticks out to me is their interior defense, specifically rim protection. Onyeka Okongwu is not the world's best defender. He's not the world's worst defender, but he is definitely a little undersized. And he's not, at least at this stage in his career, a very effective rim protector. And they also don't have anyone that's really any better off the bench. They're thin at the 5 spot. Uh, Ever since Okongwu, moved to the starting lineup. Clint Capella. He's not super great defensively. Larry Nance Jr., if he still exists, I haven't seen him play in a while. I don't know. There's just not really any rim protection in the starting lineup or off the bench. And then another thing that doesn't necessarily, I don't necessarily have the stats to back this up because I actually went and looked, and their percentages aren't terrible, but just visually, their defensive rebounding is not great. I've seen this team in multiple games get really beat up on the glass defensively, even if the statistics aren't necessarily that bad. In the Magic game they played, that's who they'll be playing in the first round of the play-in. In the Magic game they played just last week, I watched them get like torn up on the glass by Wendell Carter Jr. and John Isaac. So if you're getting beat up on the glass by those guys, no disrespect to them, there might be something a little wrong. And then of course the biggest weakness for this team is their reliance on Trey, right? Trey is a huge amount of the creation and just shot creation, shot making for this team. And it gives defenses a really easy thing to point to and say, this is what we're going to take away. Scheming to get the ball out of his hands, teams either blitzing him, doubling him, jumping screens, things like that to just kind of mess with him and his offensive flow is something that has been really effective all season to kind of limit their offense, especially now that Jalen Johnson is out. He's got a usage rate of 32.5%, which is 94th percentile in the league. And then another thing that I thought was interesting is his team's, so Atlanta's offensive rating as a team actually correlates with his usage. So the team's offensive rating is better when his usage is higher, which is an indication that this team really, really relies on him, to drive the offense. And then just 2 questions I have for this team is how efficient is Trey going to be? He's not been super efficient this season. He's got just under 50% effective field goal percentage, which is definitely below league average. But his floater has been looking like it's falling a little better recently in the past couple weeks. And but his 3-point shooting is definitely going to be a big question. He's honestly, for his career, not a very high percentage 3-point shooter, but we all know that he's a very, capable shooter. It's just really, is his 3-point efficiency going to be high enough where teams have to, come out beyond the 3-point line and really respect him from deep? And the second question is, can we get more secondary creation out of guys like Dyson Daniels, Karis LeVert off the bench, anyone else on the team? Maybe you can step up and create a little bit. Because if the defense is going to load up on Trey, you're going to need these guys to be able to, generate some decent looks. Final team I'm going to talk about before we get to the matchup stuff is the Orlando Magic. And the strengths of this team, a lot like the Heat, is just defense. Defense. They're a spectacular defensive team across the board. They've got the size and physicality they need. They've got good on-ball defenders at every position. Something I'd like to point out as well is KCP looks really good defensively in the past couple weeks. He's getting in the passing lanes, disrupting stuff. But just in general, everyone on this team, really most everyone on this team that gets minutes is a very quality defender. And I mean, their defensive rating this season is second in the league, only to OKC. They're holding teams to 109.8 points per 100 possessions, which is a crazy, crazy number. Very, very good in the modern NBA. The other strengths, I'm just going to say Paolo and Franz. Paolo as a shot maker and as just a scoring threat in general has been really impressive in the past couple weeks, at least. Obviously, there were some stretches during the season where he didn't look so good, obviously coming back from the injury and everything like that. But in the past month or two, he's looked much better, and he's I trust him as a go-to scorer when he's needed to be a scorer, which this team needs a lot of. And something as well that I've been really liking about his game is he's able to get to the line really consistently, which helps him a lot when his mid-range shot, his ISO game isn't necessarily going his way. It still gives him a good floor and a consistent source of offense. And then Franz, obviously, his impact as a driver, finisher at the rim, and a playmaker. I mean, he's the really outside of Jalen Suggs to some extent, who's hurt right now, obviously. Franz is the source of most of the playmaking on this team. And that, leads us very smoothly into the weaknesses. This team's offense is terrible. It's really bad. It's the worst offense in the league. It's just not very good. There's not much to say. Their three-point shooting is bad. They're in the bottom half in three-point frequency, and they're dead last in three-point shooting percentage. They're actually dead last in just field goal percentage in the league as a whole from everywhere, which is not a very good sign for a team that has playoff hopes. And then the other thing to consider is the offense doesn't even look very fluid either. They don't play with crazy pace. They don't have, many quality ball handlers. I mean, you're getting guys like Cole Anthony being your secondary or tertiary ball handler after Paolo and Franz with Jalen Suggs out right now. Paolo hasn't really shown me that he's able to play make and create off of his gravity. He has a tendency to really force shots, even through doubles and a lot of help, which is not super encouraging. But then again, the rest of the team isn't much better. And then another thing to consider is the connection between Paolo and Franz, who are the two best players on the Magic by a substantial margin, is not good. When they're on the floor together, they have a 112.0 offensive rating, which is not very good. And then with just Franz on the floor and Paolo off the floor, they have an offensive rating of 115.8, which is 3.8 points better, is definitely substantial. And then with just Paolo on and no Franz, they're 107.8. So much worse, actually, with just Paolo on the floor. I mean, their best players don't play together well, and their number one option doesn't really seem to elevate the offense when he's out there by himself. So it's definitely a concern. And so the questions I have for this team is the first thing is, can anybody on this team make some threes? I mean, KCP for his career has always been a pretty good three-point shooter. He's taken a step back this season. You'd like to think that maybe at some point he can bring that back, hopefully, for the play-in. And then is Franz able to knock any down? He's not been very good over his career. He was showing some signs of improvement maybe, but it hasn't really materialized. Paolo's been shooting really well over the past couple weeks. He's shooting 35% since March 1st, which is not crazy, but for him, considering he's shooting 30% on the season as a whole, that's much better. And then how much are we going to get out of Paolo with the defense kind of focused on him? Is he going to be able to find his teammates? Is he going to be able to create? Is he going to force up shots through doubles? Just the quality of decisions that he makes is definitely something to watch, especially against better defenses. All right, now getting into the matchups. Talk about Miami versus Chicago first. This is the first play-in game that's actually going to be played. It's the 9-10 seed game. Winner of this obviously plays the loser of the 7-8 seed game of Atlanta versus Orlando. So the win conditions for each team are, in my mind, pretty clear. For Miami, I think they're going to need to get offense from the wings and from their five-man. I mean, they've got a huge size advantage, a depth advantage, especially at the wing positions. I mean, you've got Wiggins, you've got Bam, Jovic, Jaime Jaquez. These kind of guys are going to need to be able to punish the mismatches that they're going to get playing against a smaller Chicago team. And they're just going to have to create looks and try and get to the rim on Nikola Vucevic, who's not a very good rim protector. And then I also want to see more drive and kick from the Miami offense, because Chicago's scheme, especially in games versus Miami, you saw this a lot in the game that they played earlier last week. They have a very help-heavy scheme. If you can create dribble penetration and generate those threes off of the drive and kick game, instead of, settling for the floaters and mid-range shots. Just keep the ball moving, drive and kick, create opportunities to attack closeouts, get your 3-point volume up off of the drive and kick. You saw that in the second half of that Chicago Miami game last week. In the first half, Miami was taking a lot of the floaters and mid-range shots and not really generating as many threes, not moving the ball as well, and their offense looked really bad. But then in the second half, they got a little more into it. It wasn't enough to win the game, but it looked a little more competent. And then I'm just going to need their stars to do their thing. I mean, Hero needs to continue to drive the offense. He needs to score well. And then Bam needs to be solid defensively and be able to get buckets when they come to him. That's that simple. And then for Chicago, win conditions are pretty straightforward as well, right? They've got to hedge and rotate. They've got to deny these kind of looks at the rim. They've got to force Miami to beat them with ball movement by helping off drives and, hedging and recovering, that kind of thing. Rotate well. Basically just force Miami to move the ball and beat you with anything other than the pick and roll. And then they've got to keep Tyler Hero out of the paint. Tyler Hero has obviously been the driving force of the offense, getting downhill off the screens or on the pick and roll, and then him as a shooter as well. You just got to jump screens. You got to deny him that space to get downhill. Keep him out of the paint to prevent the drive and kick that I talked about, being important for Miami. At the end of the day, Josh Giddey's got to hit his threes, right? Bam is going to probably be matched up on Josh Giddey when he's at the 4 and probably even when he's at the 5. And he's going to want to roam off and play, that help style defense that he's famous for. And if he's out there, he's definitely going to be sagging off of Josh Giddey. So if Josh Giddey can hit his threes and force, Bam to respect him, it'll not only open up Giddey's game as a playmaker, driving, but it'll also just create so much more space for everyone else on the team, really just open everything up. All right, going into the other opening matchup between Atlanta and Orlando, here's what I want to see out of Atlanta in that matchup, right? I'm going to need some secondary creation. The Magic are going to be more than happy to do everything they can to deny Trey and force the ball out of his hands. So I'm going to need to see Dyson Daniels, Karis LeVert, things I talked about in the question that I had for them earlier. They're going to have to be able to create some offense to kind of lighten the load for Trae Young. I also want to see 3-point volume. It's not really hard to outscore the Orlando Magic, considering how bad their offense is, especially if you're winning the math battle. So if you can get up and make a good amount of threes, with the 5-out offense that you have as Atlanta, the numbers are going to be in your favor, even if their defense is really good. And then the other thing is just make Paolo pass, right? Get a send 2 when he's getting into his ISO game. Do your best thing not to foul him. And he's either going to try and force the shot through the double, which is a bad look, or he's going to have to pass the ball and make someone else score, which is not as good of a look as just Paolo, getting a one-on-one matchup. If you can kind of deny his ISO game, then the Magic's offense is really going to suffer. Final thing for Atlanta in this matchup is you just got to dare people to shoot, help, crash the glass, try and get more defensive rebounds. The Magic are terrible shooting team statistically. So, you just got to hedge your bets, focus on taking away the paint and getting on the glass. Because at the end of the day, you have to play to your opponent's weaknesses and your strengths, right? And 3-point shooting is definitely Orlando's weakness. And for Orlando, basically just jump Trey, right? You got to blitz him, jump the screens, show help at the nail when he's trying to drive. Everything you can do to get the ball out of his hands and take him away as a driver of the offense is going to be massive for reducing how effective Atlanta can score the ball. And then I also want to see Franz attacking downhill. He's a very talented driver, and you've got good offensive rebounders on the team around him, guys like Goga, whoever else, get them involved, force the rim protectors to defend you as a driver if you're Franz Wagner. Get into the pick and roll, pick on that size mismatch, grab the offensive rebounds, just get downhill, get to the glass. Basically everything I said Atlanta needs to worry about doing. I want you to do that because that's playing to your strength. And then someone's got to make some threes if you want to win these games. KCP, Franz, the bench guys, it doesn't matter. Someone's just going to have to, knock down enough threes if you want to keep up with Atlanta's offense. All right, I'm going to kind of speed run the rest of these matchups here because, we don't know who's going to be playing in the second round of the play-in, if you can call it that. So for Miami versus Orlando, same kind of things I said before for Miami. I wanted to see them defend the drive in this game, right? They've got the size defensively to block the big wings and center play from the Magic. If you can block his drives, Franz's drives, and take him away, as a drive and kick guy or as a finisher at the rim, that will help you a lot. Same thing I said before with Paolo, make him pass. Same thing I said before, dare them to shoot. Just move the ball, share the ball, try to get Orlando in rotation and, just move, open up opportunities to attack closeouts, get downhill and get at the rim or get some open threes, right? Simple stuff. For Orlando, similar to what I said before, you want to blitz and try and deny Tyler Hero, force other people to initiate the offense because he really is a driving force, off of his drive and kick game, off of his shooting gravity. So if you can deny him as much as possible and force other players on the Heat to score, or force other players on the Heat to, create shots. It's really about, preventing Tyler Hero from, being the driving force of the offense. And then the other thing is just disrespect the double big lineup, right? When the double big lineup is out there, they have the size to match you with your big wings and Franz and Paolo. But if you disrespect them, dare them to shoot, and they're not knocking down the shots, they're not going to be able to play that lineup as much, and that's going to open up offense for you. For Miami versus Atlanta, I want to see Miami use their size and verticality to just abuse Onyeka Okongwu at the rim. I want to see you guys get vertical, use the double bigs to attack inside, burn them with the lobs, post ups, let Bam, do his thing inside, and then take away Trey, as I said before. For Atlanta, get up your threes. It's going to be hard to really get a crazy inside game going against just the oppressive size that the Heat team kind of has. So if you can make them rotate, off the drive and kick game, get the 3-point volume up, use that 5-out spacing to really stretch them and force them to make decisions defensively. That'll be big for you. Jump screens, prevent Tyler Hero from driving into the paint. Same thing as I kind of said before. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot. For Chicago versus Orlando, if that matchup happens, Chicago's just got to space, get your threes up, try and outscore them. Miami's a very big team and Chicago's not a very big team. So if you can kind of pull them out on the perimeter and make them defend you in space, that'll go in your favor, as the smaller player. And then just all out defense on Paolo and Franz. You don't have great matchups for them individually, so you've got to help. You've got to hedge and recover. You've got to, show to, poke at the ball, do whatever you can to prevent them from scoring easily. Just anyone else but Paolo and Franz. For Orlando, you got to attack the mismatches. You have the size advantage. You have the talent advantage, especially on the wing. So just get Paolo and Franz attacking, downhill, get them attacking in isolation. And that's how you're going to probably score most of your buckets. And then also I want to see Orlando kind of run Chicago off the line. I want to see hard closeouts, forcing drives, funneling the smaller defenders inside and trying to make them attack you in the paint because you're not going to win the 3-point shooting battle with Chicago, as we know, second most volume in the league. And finally, Chicago versus Atlanta matchup, if that were to happen, again, deny Trey. And then I want to see that ball movement from Chicago take on a kind of lead role in their offense because Atlanta's not a very good rotating team and recovering. So if you can keep the ball moving and generate those threes, kind of do the Diet Celtics thing that Chicago does a little bit, that'll be how you can win that game. And then for Atlanta, I think it's really about the pick and roll, right? There are some weak defenders you can attack, like Giddey, Kevin Huerter, Kobe White, these guys. And then Vooch, obviously, is not a very good defender. So if you can force them to defend the pick and roll and, just use your pick and roll playmaking ability of Trae Young, his lob passing ability, his drive and kick game. Just basically tell Trae Young to run 100 pick and rolls, and they probably can't defend it. All right, in terms of my predictions for who's going to make it out, um, I really think it could go to any two of these three teams, uh, except for Miami. I think Miami is definitely the weakest of these four teams. I don't think they match up super well with any of the other teams here. And then in terms of what the other two teams that make it are, I think I'm going to give the edge to Orlando in the 7-8 matchup with Atlanta. Sorry, simply because Atlanta really lacking an answer for the big scorers in Paolo and Franz, and then I think the Magic are really well equipped to kind of deny Trae Young and deal with him as an offensive engine. And then in terms of whoever makes it out of the second game, I'm going to go with Chicago. I'm high on this team. I'm a little higher on this team than a lot of people I know that, but just the competency and the ability of this team to just have these explosive offensive games. I mean, in a format like the play in, where it's literally just win two best of one games and you're in, I think that's an environment where the Chicago Bulls team will thrive. But I could very well see, either of those going the other way: Atlanta beating Orlando in round one, or Orlando and Atlanta making it, Atlanta and Chicago making it. Basically, my number one prediction is Miami is definitely out, and I think Orlando and Chicago are going to make it through as a 7 and 8 seed, respectively, to face the Celtics and the Cavs. All right, and that's all I have to say on the East play-in. I'll be doing another one of these little videos on the West play-in at some point, either depending on when this comes out, either later today or tomorrow. Definitely before before the play-in starts. But if you're still here watching, thanks. I appreciate it a lot. Leave a like, comment for the algorithm, whatever the YouTuber thing to say is, and I'll see you guys in the next one.